I've worked that range for 19 years, and I'll tell you something. You learn to read people before they ever load a round. You watch how they carry their gear. You watch how they set down a case. The way a man unzips a rifle bag tells you almost everything about how he's going to shoot that day. The slow ones, the careful ones, they usually scare me. It's the loud ones who never worry me. Loud men miss. I've seen it 1,000 times. But that morning I wasn't watching anybody close. It was cold. The kind of cold that gets into your knuckles and stays there. We were up in the high country, almost 6,000 feet, where the air is thin and the wind has a temper. The sun was barely over the ridgeline and the frost on the grass still looked like spilled sugar. You could hear it crunch under boots. That sound carries when nobody's talking yet. It was the third day of the match. The big one. The kind people fly across the country for, the kind where the prize money is real and the targets sit so far out you measure them in something close to a mile. Extreme long range, they call it. ELR. Most people don't even know it exists. The shots are so far that the bullet is in the air for almost 4 seconds. You fire and then you wait. You wait and you wait. And somewhere out in that haze, a piece of metal the size of a dinner plate either rings or it doesn't. That's the whole sport. Ring or don't ring, nothing in between. By that third morning, the field had thinned out. We started with 60-some shooters, big names, sponsored guys with gear worth more than my truck. By Sunday, we were down to the ones who could actually hold it together when the wind started lying to them. 18 left, maybe 19. And then she pulled in. I remember the gravel sound first. A little hatchback, gray, dented near the back wheel, one headlight cover cracked and taped. It came up the access road slow, like the driver wasn't sure she was in the right place. It parked at the far end of the lot, away from the big rigs and the trailers with the sponsor decals. A woman got out, late 30s, maybe 40, hard to say. She wore a faded canvas jacket, the elbows worn soft, and a knit cap pulled down low. She moved stiff, like her back hurt, and she stood there for a second just looking at the line of shooters down on the flats, just looking, like she was deciding something. Then she opened the hatch and pulled out a rifle case. Now I have to tell you about the case because that's where it started. Everybody out there had these hardshell cases, foam-lined, locks on the corners, the kind that cost $400 empty. Hers was soft. An old soft bag, the green faded almost to gray, a strap held on with a zip tie. She slung it over her shoulder and grabbed a small range bag with the other hand, and she started walking down toward the firing line. I heard the laughing before she was even halfway there. It wasn't loud at first, just a couple of the younger guys near the prep tables. One of them, big kid, shaved head, sleeve of tattoos, shot for one of the optics companies, leaned over to his buddy and said something, and they both grinned. Then the buddy said it louder, loud enough that it carried. "Hey, the bake sale's the other direction." A few of them laughed, not all but enough. She kept walking, didn't even turn her head. There's a thing that happens to a person's face when they've heard something 100 times before. It doesn't change, it just goes still. That's what hers did, still as the frost. I'd worked that range long enough to know I should say something. I'm not proud that I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself men talk like that and it blows over. But the truth is, I looked at the soft bag and the taped headlight and I made the same quiet bet they did. I figured she'd zero a few rounds, miss the long stuff, and pack up by lunch. We get folks like that. They sign up to say they did it. No shame in it. I was wrong. I want to be honest about that right at the start, because everything I'm about to tell you only matters if you understand that I was just as wrong as the loud ones. Maybe more. She found an empty spot on the line. Far end, station 9, the one nobody wants because the wind comes across it sideways from the gap in the ridge. She set the soft bag down on the bench. Slow, careful. The careful ones remember. The man running registration that day was a fella named Doyle. Big mustache, clipboard, been doing it longer than me. He walked over to her with that look officials get, the one that says I'm sure you're lost. I drifted close enough to hear. You registered? Doyle asked. Should be, she said, quiet voice. Voss came in late last night, paid online. Doyle ran his thumb down the sheet. His eyebrows went up a little. Voss, he said. Huh, okay, you're at 9. He looked at the soft bag, then at her, then back at the bag. You done this kind of distance before. She looked out at the targets. Way out. The farthest one that day was set at 1,840 meters. They'd surveyed it with a laser the night before and painted the number on a board so everybody could see it. 1840. Better than a mile. It sat against the brown hillside like a little gray coin you could barely find with your naked eye. She looked at it a long moment. A bit, she said. And that was all. Now let me back up and tell you about the others on the line, because you have to understand the room she walked into. The favorite that weekend was a man named Carl Rennick. Everybody knew Rennick. He'd won this match 2 years running. He had a rig that looked like something off a spaceship, a custom action, a barrel as thick as my wrist, a scope with so many dials it looked like a cockpit. He had a spotter, a weather meter on a little tripod, a tablet running ballistic software, and a folding chair with his name embroidered on it. His name, on the chair. Rennick wasn't cruel exactly. He was worse. He was friendly about it. He walked down the line that morning shaking hands, all teeth, and when he got to Station 9 he stopped and looked at the soft bag and smiled this big warm smile and said, "First time out here." "Something like that," she said. "Well, don't let the mile spook you." He patted the bench like you'd pat a kid's shoulder. "Lot of guys can't even find that target in the glass. No shame in just ringing the closer ones. Build up to it." He winked. "We were all new once." "Thanks," she said. He moved on, still smiling, already forgetting her. And the thing is, the men around her took their cue from that smile. If Rennick had decided she was harmless, then she was harmless, and they could go back to ignoring her. So they did. I watched her unzip the soft bag. And here's the first thing that snagged me. The first little splinter of wait a minute that I'd think about for a long time after. The rifle inside that ratty bag was immaculate. Not flashy, not chrome and carbon. It was a bolt gun, dark, plain, a heavy barrel and a stock worn smooth at the cheek piece from about 10,000 rounds of contact. But it was clean. The kind of clean that takes hours. The bolt slid like it was floating in oil. The scope on top was old glass, a brand they don't even make anymore, but the turrets had been remarked by hand in tiny precise numbers with a paint pen. Somebody who knew exactly what they were doing had set up that rifle. Somebody who didn't care how it looked, only how it shot. I'd seen guns dressed up to look like they cost a fortune. I'd never seen one dressed down to hide what it was. She laid out her rounds on a little cloth, and those weren't factory rounds. Those were hand-loaded, each one, and they all sat in a row like soldiers, the brass polished, the bullets seated to a length she'd clearly figured out herself. She lined them up so careful, touched each one, like she was counting them, or maybe like she was saying something to them. A young range volunteer, a college kid named Petey we had helping that summer, came by with the timing clipboard and saw her ammo and stopped. "Whoa," he said, "did you load those yourself?" "Mum." "How long's that take?" She actually smiled a little then, just a corner of it. "Longer than it takes to shoot them," she said. Petey laughed. He liked her right away. Kids are smart that way. They haven't learned yet to bet against the quiet ones. The match ran in stages. Each shooter got their turn at each distance, scored by impacts, with the long shots worth the most. You climbed the ladder 600, then 9, then 1,200, then 15, and finally the mile-plus monster at the end, the 1840, where almost nobody scored at all. Most years, 2 or 3 guys hit that final target across the whole field. Some years, nobody. The wind picked up around mid-morning. You could feel the match change with it. The flags out on the range started snapping, then lying flat, then snapping the other way. The mirage came up off the ground, that shimmer that makes the target look like it's underwater, and you could see guys starting to sweat through it. This is where ELR separates people. Anybody with a decent rifle can hit a big target on a calm day. But wind out past a mile isn't one wind. It's 3 or 4 winds stacked, each one pushing a different direction at a different distance, and you've got 4 seconds of flight time for all of them to gang up on your bullet. You can do the math perfect and still miss by 10 feet because the air, 1,000 meters down range, decided to do its own thing. Rennick was up first on the long stuff. He took his time, spotter calling numbers, tablet glowing, the weather meter ticking. He dialed his turrets with these little clean clicks. He settled in behind that spaceship rifle, and the whole line went quiet to watch. He fired. We waited 3 seconds for. Crack, the hit echoed back across the flats, that flat metal ring you feel in your teeth. The 1,500-meter target, clean hit. The line clapped. Rennick grinned and racked the bolt. He hit it again, and a third time. Then he moved to the 1840, the mile plus. He worked for it. 3 shots, 2 misses you could see kicking up dirt low and left, and then on the 4th crack, a hit. The big one, the line went loud. Guys whooped. Somebody yelled, "There it is, Carl." Rennick stood up and tipped an imaginary hat and soaked it in. 1 hit on the long target, that was probably going to win it. 1 hit on that thing usually did. He walked back up the line like a king. The other favorites took their turns. A few hit the 1,500. Nobody else touched the mile. By early afternoon, there was a feeling settling over the whole place that it was already decided. Rennick's match. Everybody else shooting for second. And down at Station 9, the woman in the canvas jacket hadn't even fired her first round of the day. She'd been sitting, just watching the flags, watching the mirage. She had a little notebook, a real paper notebook, and every few minutes she'd write something down. No tablet, no weather meter on a tripod. She licked her finger once and held it up, which made the tattoo kid laugh out loud. "She's checking the wind with her finger," he said to his buddies. "We got Annie Oakley over here." That one got a real laugh from the group. Annie Oakley. It stuck. For the next hour I heard them calling her that under their breath. "Hey, Annie's still writing in her diary. Annie's gonna shoot it with a slingshot." She heard, I know she heard. The stillness came back over her face. But here's what I noticed, because by then I'd stopped pretending I wasn't watching her. While they laughed, her eyes never left the range. She wasn't writing about them. She was reading the wind they couldn't see. Every flag, every shimmer, every little dust devil that spun up and died. She was building something in that notebook, the way a person builds a map of a country they're about to walk into alone. She wasn't nervous. That was the thing that finally got under my skin. Everybody out there past a mile is nervous, even the great ones, even Rennick under all that swagger. You can see it in the hands. Her hands were perfectly still. I'd seen still hands like that exactly twice before in my life. Both times on men who'd done things in places they were never allowed to talk about. I went and found Doyle by the registration table. He had the master sheet. "Hey," I said, "Station 9, Voss, that all it says, just a name." Doyle scratched under his mustache. "Yeah, late entry, paid full. No club, no sponsor, no record I can find." He squinted down at the page. "Only weird thing." He turned it so I could see. There was a little box on the form where you list prior competition. Most folks pack it full, every match they ever placed in. Hers had 1 line, just one. It said out of practice. That was all. Doyle and I looked at each other. "Out of practice," he said slowly. Down on the line the loudspeaker crackled. "Station 9, Voss, you're up for the long stages whenever you're ready." She closed her notebook, put the pen behind her ear, and she got down behind that plain dark rifle in the worst spot on the line, the one where the wind comes sideways through the gap, and the whole range sort of half-turned to watch the way you watch something you expect to be funny. I didn't expect it to be funny anymore. I don't know how to explain it except to say the air got tight, like the range itself was holding its breath. The flag snapped. The mirage rolled, and the woman they were calling Annie Oakley pressed her cheek to that worn smooth stock and went so completely still that for a second I couldn't tell if she was breathing at all. She didn't start with the mile. That's the first thing that told me she actually knew what she was doing. The amateurs, the ones trying to prove something, they always swing straight for the farthest target. They want the big ring, the big moment. They skip the closer shots because closer feels like beneath them. And then they miss the far one cold with no information, and they've got nothing. She started at 1200. She laid her hand flat on the bench first, palm down for a second. I don't know why, maybe a habit, maybe a prayer. Then she loaded one round, just one. Closed the bolt with that soft oiled sound. She didn't rush. She watched a flag out past the 800 marker drop and lie still, and the second it went slack she fired. The shot wasn't loud the way the magnums were. It had a deeper, rounder sound, a whump more than a crack. Hand-loaded, tuned, and then the weight. 1, 2, 3. Crack, 1200. Dead center. The target was still swinging when she'd already opened the bolt. A few heads turned. Not many. 1200 isn't that hard for the people left on day 3, but a couple of the guys near me went quiet. She loaded another, watched the flag, fired into the same lull. Crack again. 1500 this time. She jumped a whole stage, and she hit it first try, no spotting shot, no walking it in. Cold bore, one round, 1500 meters ring. Now the line was looking. PD the kid had stopped pretending to do anything with his clipboard. He just stood there with his mouth a little open. She racked the bolt and the empty brass tinked onto the bench, and she reached up, very calm, and made one tiny adjustment to her turret. Quarter turn. Click. Then she stopped. She didn't shoot. She'd seen something. I followed her eyes out to the range, and I saw it too, a dust devil, way out past 1500, spinning slow, kicking a little curtain of dirt up off the flats. It drifted across the line of fire and died. She watched the spot where it died like she was waiting to see if its ghost would come back. It did. A minute later, another one spun up in nearly the same place. She nodded, just barely, to nobody, and wrote in the notebook without looking down at it. That's when I understood what I was watching. She wasn't shooting the targets. She was shooting the air. The targets were just where the air happened to be pointing. Rennick had drifted back down by now. He'd heard the rings. He stood with his arms crossed, still smiling, but it was a different smile, tighter. He watched her hit 1500 a second time, then a third, and the tightness in his smile got worse each time. "She's hot today," he said, to nobody in particular, in that easy, generous voice. "Beginner's luck runs warm sometimes." Nobody answered him. The tattoo kid had stopped saying Annie Oakley. Then she moved to the 1840, the mile plus, the monster. The whole range knew it, the way a crowd knows when something's about to happen even before it happens. People came over from the other stations. The food truck guy turned off his generator so it'd be quiet. Doyle put his clipboard down. Even Rennick uncrossed his arms. She didn't load yet. She lay there behind the rifle and just looked through the scope for a long, long time. A minute. 2. Somebody started to say something and somebody else shushed him. I was close enough to see her face in profile. Eyes open, steady, that stillness. And I saw her lips move just slightly, and I'm almost sure, I'll never be certain, but I'm almost sure she was counting flags. Counting them, weighting them, doing in her head what Rennick's tablet did with a battery and a glowing screen. Then she loaded, one round, one. She set her finger lightly on the trigger and she waited, and waited. The wind was wrong, you could see it in the flags, snapping hard left. She let it snap. Let a full minute go by, finger resting, not pulling. People shifted on their feet. The waiting was almost unbearable, and she was the only one not feeling it. And then the flags out at 1200 dropped. Then the ones at 1500 dropped. A half-second later, like a wave running down the range away from her. She'd been waiting for that, for the whole length of the wind to lie down at once. She fired into the lull. Whump! And then the longest 4 seconds I have ever lived through. I swear nobody on that line breathed. 4 seconds is nothing. 4 seconds is how long it takes to tie a shoe. But with a bullet in the air over a mile out, and a woman everyone had laughed at lying behind the rifle, 4 seconds stretched out into something you could have walked across. 1, 2, the food truck guy had his hand over his mouth. 3, Rennick's smile was completely gone now. 4, crack. It came back across the flats, thin and far and absolutely unmistakable. The 1840 target, the mile plus, the one most of them couldn't even find in the glass. Dead hit first round, cold bore. For 1 full second there was total silence, like the whole range had to make sure it had really heard it. Then Petey the kid let out a yell you could have heard in the next county, and something broke open, and people were talking all at once, loud, fast. Did you see that first shot, cold bore? Did she just? She didn't react. That's what I keep coming back to. She didn't whoop or stand up or tip an imaginary hat. She opened the bolt. The brass tinked onto the bench. She reached up and adjusted the turret a hair, and she loaded another round. And she hit it again. The yell that went up the second time was different. The first one was surprise. The second one was something closer to awe, and underneath it, in the men who'd been laughing all morning, something that was starting to feel a little like shame. She hit it a third time. 3 for 3. On the target nobody hits, while Rennick, the 2-time champion with the spaceship rifle and the embroidered chair, had needed 4 tries to ring it once. That's when I looked over at Rennick, and I'll never forget his face. He wasn't angry. I'd expected angry. He was something worse for a man like him. He looked like he'd just remembered something he'd spent a long time trying to forget. Because Rennick, it turned out, was the only person on that range who knew exactly who she was. I didn't know it yet. The kid didn't know it. The tattoo crew calling her Annie Oakley sure didn't know it. But Carl Rennick knew, and his face had gone the color of the frost on the morning grass, and very quietly, almost to himself, I heard him say one word. He said a name, not Voss. He said Mara. And he said it the way you say the name of someone you were absolutely certain was dead. You have to understand something about Carl Rennick to understand why he went white. I'd known the man distant for the better part of a decade. Champion, loud in the friendly way, the kind of guy who never said a cruel word and never let you forget he was better than you. But that morning, watching that woman ring the mile 3 times cold, Rennick wasn't thinking about the match anymore. I could see it. He'd left the range entirely. He was somewhere else, somewhere years back, and whatever was there had its hand around his throat. He walked off the line. Just like that. Didn't say a word to his spotter. Left his spaceship rifle sitting on the bench, left the embroidered chair, and walked up the hill toward the equipment shed with his shoulders hunched like a man walking into rain. I'd never once seen Carl Rennick walk away from a crowd that was paying attention to him. It wasn't in his nature. I went after him. I don't know exactly why. Maybe 19 years of reading people had finally tripped a wire in me, and I needed to know what I was looking at. I found him behind the shed, leaning on the wall, breathing like he'd run a mile. "Carl," I said, "you all right?" He laughed, but there was no air in it. "You don't know who that is," he said. "Down at 9, you don't have any idea." "Tell me then." He looked at me for a long moment, deciding. Then he looked back toward the line, where you could still hear the buzz of the crowd, and he said it quiet. "That's Mara Voss." He let it sit. When I didn't react, he shook his head, almost angry that the name meant nothing to me. "You came up civilian, you wouldn't have heard, but there's a certain kind of people who'd hear that name and go cold all over." He swallowed. "She was the best long-gun shooter this country ever made, and I mean ever, and almost nobody alive is allowed to say so." I'm going to tell it to you the way Rennick told it to me, behind that shed, in a voice that kept dropping like he was afraid the wall had ears. Mara Voss came out of nowhere. A nothing town, a hard childhood, the kind of place that either kills a person young or makes them quiet and very, very patient. She joined up at 18 because there was nothing else, and somewhere along the way somebody put a rifle in her hands and discovered the thing. The thing is rare. You can't train it into a person. You can train the math, the dope, the breathing, the position, all of it. But there's a final fraction that's just there or it isn't, a stillness, a relationship with time and air that lets a person feel what the wind is going to do a second before it does it. Some old hands call it reading God's mind. Most shooters never have it. The great ones have a little. Rennick said Mara had more of it than anyone who ever lived. They moved her into a program. Rennick was vague about which one and I didn't ask. The kind of program that doesn't have a sign on the door. She set records that were never published because the distances themselves were classified. She trained the men who trained the men whose names you'd recognize if I could say them. Rennick himself had been in a class she taught, 15 years back, young and cocky, and she'd taken him apart in an afternoon without ever raising her voice. She told me I shot like I was angry at the target, he said. She said the target doesn't care if you're angry, only the wind cares and the wind can't be bullied. He almost smiled. I hated her for it. Took me 10 years to understand she was right. And then there was the day everything stopped. Rennick didn't know the whole story. Nobody outside did. There'd been an operation, somewhere far away, somewhere hot. Mara had been the shooter. And whatever happened that day, something went wrong that wasn't her fault and wasn't anyone's fault except the people who'd made the decisions she had to live with afterward. A call came down from above her, a bad call, and she was the one holding the rifle when the bad call turned into something terrible. She refused a second shot. That was the part Rennick had heard, the part that got whispered. She'd had a target in her glass, a clean shot, the shot she'd been ordered to take, and she'd seen something through the scope, something the men giving orders couldn't see from where they sat, and she'd taken her finger off the trigger and refused. It turned out she was right. It turned out the order was wrong. It turned out that if she'd fired, the thing that happened would have been monstrous, and because she didn't, it wasn't. And they ended her career anyway, quietly, for refusing an order. The people who'd have been ruined if she'd fired were the same people who decided she was a problem for not firing. That's how it goes, sometimes, with the people who make those calls. The ones who are right at the wrong moment get buried deepest. She just vanished, Rennick said. One day she was the name, the legend, and the next there was no record she'd ever existed. I figured she'd drunk herself into a ditch somewhere, or worse. A lot of them end worse. He looked at his hands. I never thought I'd see her again, and the last place I ever thought I'd see her is some civilian club match with the softbag amateurs. Off the wall, the color was coming back to his face, but the swagger wasn't. Now do you understand? He said. I spent 2 years being king of this little hill, and the whole time the actual best shooter in the world was out there somewhere fixing her own car and loading her own brass and being forgot. He shook his head slow. She didn't come here to win a trophy. You don't understand. A woman like that, she's already won things you and I can't imagine. She came here for something else. For what? I said. He didn't answer right away. He looked back down the hill, toward Station 9, toward the small, still woman in the worn canvas jacket. I don't know yet, he said, but I aim to find out. When we came back down, the mood on the line had changed completely. The laughing was gone. The Annie Oakley nonsense was gone. The tattoo kid was sitting on a cooler with his elbows on his knees, just staring out at the 1840 target like he couldn't make peace with it. Word travels on a firing line. By the time Rennick and I got back, half the field had cobbled together some version of the truth. She's military, she's somebody. She's not what we thought, and the other half could just feel it in the air, the way you feel a storm coming before the first cloud. Petey the kid had appointed himself her unofficial guardian. He'd brought her a cup of coffee from the food truck. She was holding it with both hands, not drinking it, just letting it warm her fingers, and she was back to watching the flags. I walked over. I don't know what I meant to say. Maybe just to be the one official who hadn't laughed. But before I could get a word out, she spoke, without turning her head. "You went to ask him about me," she said, "not a question." "I did," I said, "no point lying. He told me some of it, probably not the real of it." "Nobody knows the real of it," she said, calm, not bitter, just true. She took a small sip of the coffee. "Carl always talked too much, even 15 years ago. Good hands, though, could have been great if he'd stopped performing long enough to listen to the air." A pause. "He's not performing today. That's the first time I've seen that." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the thing I actually wanted to know. "Why are you here?" She was quiet for a while. The flag snapped. A dust devil spun up out past 1500 and died. "You spend a long time," she said finally, "being the best at a thing nobody's allowed to know you did. And then you spend a longer time being nobody at all, fixing your car, going to the grocery store, watching people who think they're good at something be proud of themselves." She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. "After a while you start to wonder if you imagine the whole thing, if you were ever really that person, if the air ever really talked to you, or if you just made it up to survive a bad life." She looked out at the 1840. "I didn't come here to beat these men," she said. "I don't care about these men. I'm sorry, that sounds cruel. I don't mean it cruel. I came here because I needed to know if she was still in there, the one who could read God's mind." She set the coffee down. "Turns out she is." And then, for the first time all day, she looked at me directly. And I understood why men who'd done terrible things had hands as still as hers. It wasn't coldness. It was the opposite. It was the stillness of someone who'd felt everything so completely that they'd had to learn to hold it without shaking, or be destroyed by it. "There's one more stage, isn't there?" she said. "The tiebreaker, if two shooters clear the long target." "There is," I said. My mouth was dry. "But nobody ever ties on the 1840. It hasn't come up in years." "It's going to come up today," she said. And right on cue, the loudspeaker crackled and Doyle's voice came across the range, and it was shaking just slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. We have two shooters who have cleared the 1840-meter target with maximum impacts. Per match rules, that means a sudden death tiebreak. One shot each, alternating at a target to be determined by the range officers." A long pause. The whole line had gone silent. "The two shooters are Carl Rennick and Mara Voss." I looked at Rennick. He'd hit the 1840 3 more times while we were gone. Quietly, no crowd, no showboating. He'd matched her. The king had stopped performing and started shooting, maybe for the first time in years, because he finally had a reason to. He looked back at me, and for the first time I saw, underneath the champion and the swagger and the embroidered chair, the cocky young man who'd been taken apart in an afternoon by a woman who never raised her voice. The one who'd spent 10 years understanding she was right. "I'm not gonna beat her," he said quietly. "You know that, right? Nobody beats her." "Then why are you doing it?" He almost smiled. "Because for 15 years I told myself I imagined how good she was, that nobody could be that good, that she was a story." He picked up his rifle, the spaceship, the cockpit of dials. "I want to lose to her on purpose terms. I want to stand on this line and watch the real thing one more time up close and know I didn't imagine it." He started toward the firing line. "That's worth more than the trophy. The trophy's just a trophy." The range officers picked the target, and when they announced the distance, even Doyle's voice cracked on it. They didn't use the 1840. Both shooters had owned it. For a sudden death tiebreak, the rules let the officers reach into a reserve, a target they keep covered, surveyed but never used, set out past everything else on the very last flat piece of ground before the hills close in. 2,110 meters. 2110. Better than a mile and a quarter. A distance most of the men on that line had never even attempted, a distance where the bullet would be in the air for nearly 5 full seconds, dropping the height of a 4-story building, drifting however far the four stacked winds decided to push it. At that range, a target the size of a door looked, through the scope, like a grain of rice. The math gets strange out there. The bullet slows below the speed of sound on the way and gets shoved around by its own wake. Even the great ones treat 2,100 meters as more luck than skill. One shot each, alternating, closest to center wins. A miss loses outright if the other shooter hits. They flipped a coin. Rennick won the toss and chose to shoot second, the pressure spot, where you have to answer whatever the other shooter does. It was a gentleman's choice. He was giving her the chance to set the bar and taking on himself the burden of matching it. The old Rennick would never have done that. The crowd murmured. They understood it too. Mara got down behind the plain dark rifle at Station 9, in the worst spot on the line, where the wind comes sideways through the gap in the ridge. The whole range came to her. 60 people, however many were left, all of them, drifting down behind the firing line and going quiet. The food truck silent, the flags snapping and lying and snapping, the mirage rolling up off the flats in waves. Late afternoon light now gone gold, the kind of light that makes long shadows and makes the far hills look closer than they are, which is its own kind of lie the wind tells. She didn't load, not for a long time. She lay there and she read the air. And this time I was close enough, and the range was quiet enough, that I could watch her do the thing Rennick called reading God's mind, and I want to try to describe it, even though I know I'll fail, because it was the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen a human being do. She watched the near flags and the far flags. She watched the mirage boil and flatten. She watched a hawk riding a thermal off to the right, and she watched the way the dry grass leaned out at 1,200, then 1,500, then in that last stretch where no flags were planted, and she had nothing to read but the color of the dust and the memory of every dust devil that had spun up and died there all day long. She'd been collecting them since morning, every single one. The whole day in that little paper notebook had been her loading the data for this one shot, this exact patch of air, and none of us had understood we were watching her prepare for a moment that hadn't been announced yet. She made one adjustment to her turret. One, a small click in a silence so complete you could hear it. Then she settled her cheek to the worn smooth stock, and she went still. And she waited. She waited so long that people started to shift. A minute, two. Her finger rested on the trigger and didn't pull. The wind was wrong. You could see it, the flags all snapping the same hard direction, the easy read, the tempting read, and she let it go by. She wasn't waiting for the wind to be gone. She was waiting for it to be honest. For the moment when the near air and the far air and the middle air all agreed on one thing for one breath, so that the lie became, for an instant, the truth. 3 minutes. And then the flags began to fall. It ran down the range away from her like a wave, the way it had that morning, 1,200 slack, 1,500 slack, the dust settling in that far patch where the hawk had stopped circling. A pocket of honest air opening up across 2,000 meters for one held breath of time. She fired into it. Whump! And the longest 5 seconds in the history of the world began. 1. Nobody breathed. I had my fists clenched so hard my nails left marks I found that night. 2. The bullet was past the speed of sound and falling. 4 stories of drop. The wind deciding whether to keep its honest promise or take it back. 3. The tattoo kid had both hands pressed over his mouth. Petey had his eyes shut. Rennick was standing dead still, watching through his spotting scope, lips parted. 4. I couldn't see the target with my naked eye. None of us could. We were all just staring at a gold-lit hillside a mile and a quarter away, waiting for a sound. 5. Crack. Faint, so faint. The thinnest little ring you ever heard, traveling all that way back to us through the gold evening air. A hit. At 2,110 meters. For a second nobody moved, because nobody could quite believe their own ears, And then Rennick lowered his head to his spotting scope and read the impact and stood up slowly and announced it to the crowd himself, in a voice gone rough, because he wanted to be the one to say it. "Center," he said, "dead center, 2110, center hit." And the range came apart. I've never heard a sound like that on a firing line. It wasn't cheering exactly. It was something more than cheering, lower and bigger, the sound a group of people make when they've watched something they will be telling people about for the rest of their lives, and they all realize it at the same instant. Grown men with their hands on their heads, Petey screaming, the tattoo kid up off his cooler yelling, and I swear there were tears on his face, this big tattooed kid who'd called her Annie Oakley 9 hours earlier. She opened the bolt, the brass tinked onto the bench. She didn't celebrate. She just lay there a moment with her cheek still on the stock, eyes closed now, and I understood that the cheering wasn't for her, not really, not the part that mattered. The part that mattered had happened inside her, silent, in the half-second before the trigger broke, when the person she'd been afraid she'd only imagined had reached out across 2,100 meters of lying air and touched the center of something nobody else could even see. She'd found her again. Now it was Rennick's turn. The crowd went quiet for him out of respect, but it was a different quiet. Everyone knew. You could feel that everyone knew. He had to match a dead center hit at 2110 just to force another round. Anything less and it was over. Rennick got down behind the spaceship. The dials, the tablet, the weather meter ticking on its little tripod. His spotter started calling numbers and Rennick listened. And then, and I'll remember this as long as I live, Rennick reached up and turned the tablet face down on the bench. He switched off the weather meter. He looked for a moment down the line at Mara, who had sat up and was watching him with that still face. And something passed between them, that 15 years old, teacher and student, the afternoon she took him apart without raising her voice. Then Rennick read the air with his own eyes, for the first time in years, maybe the first time since she'd trained him. He waited, not as long as her, he couldn't. He didn't have what she had and he knew it and he wasn't pretending anymore. But he waited honest and he picked his moment, and the moment he picked was a good one, a brave one, and he fired into it. Crack. 5 seconds. And then far away faint. A ting. A hit, but not center. We all heard it in the sound, somehow, that thinner, higher edge of the plate ring. Rennick had hit the target at 2,110 meters, a shot that would have been the greatest of his life on any other day, a shot that nobody else in the field could have made, and he'd caught the low edge of it. A hit, but an edge hit, against her center. He'd lost. He lay there for a second. Then he stood up, slow, and he turned to face her, and the whole range held still to see what the king would do. Carl Rennick looked at Mara Voss across the firing line. And he took off his cap, and he put it over his heart, and he bowed to her. Not a joke bow, not a showman's bow, a real one from the waist deep, the kind of thing you almost never see one human being do to another in real life. "That's the real thing," he said, loud enough for everyone. His voice broke clean in half on it, and he didn't care. "I want every single one of you to remember what you saw today, because you will never ever see it again." He straightened up. "I didn't imagine her," he said, quieter, mostly to himself. "All these years, I didn't imagine her." And the range erupted again, but this time they were cheering for both of them, for the loser who'd shot the second greatest shot any of us would ever see, and had the grace to bow to the first. She packed up the way she'd unpacked, slow, careful. She wiped down the plain dark rifle and slid it into the ratty soft bag and zipped it with the zip tie. She gathered up the brass, every piece. She didn't leave one, and wrapped her remaining hand loads back in their cloth. She put the pen behind her ear. She picked up the little paper notebook that had the whole day's wind in it, every flag and every dust devil, and she tucked it into the inside pocket of the worn canvas jacket, over her heart, in about the same spot Rennick had held his cap. People wanted to talk to her, of course they did. There was a line of them suddenly, all the men who'd laughed, wanting to shake her hand and say they were sorry and ask how How did you do it? What's your secret? What's your dope? What rifle is that? Who taught you? The tattoo kid was first. He didn't even try to make excuses. He just stuck out his hand and said, "Ma'am, I was an ass this morning and I'm sorry, and I'll never forget what I just watched." And she shook his hand and said, "You'll be good someday. You've got fast hands. Slow them down." And that kid looked like she'd handed him the world. She was kind to all of them, patient, but she didn't give them the secret because there wasn't one to give. The secret was a hard life and 10,000 hours and a thing you're either born with or you're not, and a wind that talks to you in a language most people go their whole lives without ever once hearing. Doyle tried to give her the trophy and the prize money right there. She wouldn't take the trophy. She told him to give it to the club to put toward more matches, more targets, more kids like Petey who carried coffee to strangers. The money she took, and I found out later, Petey found out and told me, that she signed most of it straight over to a fund for veterans who couldn't afford their own gear. The ones who came back and couldn't find the thing in themselves anymore. The ones who needed a range to go look for the person they used to be. She'd been one of them after all. She'd come here to look for that person. And she'd found her, at 2,110 meters, in a pocket of honest air. Rennick walked her to her car. The dented gray hatchback with the taped headlight parked at the far end of the lot away from the trailers. I watched them from up by the shed. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw him put the soft bag in the back for her, careful, like it was made of glass. I saw her say something that made him laugh, really laugh, head back. The first honest laugh I'd seen out of him all weekend. I saw her get in, and I saw him stand there with his hand raised as she pulled out, until the little gray car was all the way down the access road and gone. He walked back up past me. His eyes were red. He didn't bother hiding it. "You know what she said to me?" he asked, "just now." "What?" He looked off down the empty road. 15 years ago she told me I shot like I was angry at the target. Today she said, his voice did the thing again, that clean break. She said, "You finally shot like you were listening, Carl. Took you long enough." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, unashamed. "Best thing anybody ever said to me, from the only person whose opinion I ever actually wanted." He went and got his embroidered chair, and his spaceship rifle, and his tablet that he'd turned face down, and he packed it all up quiet, and he didn't say much else. "I've worked that range for 19 years. I told you at the start that you learn to read people before they ever load around. The way a man unzips a rifle bag. The careful ones, the loud ones. I told you I'd made the same quiet bet the laughing men made when I saw the soft bag and the taped headlight. And I told you I was wrong, maybe more wrong than any of them. Here's what I learned that day, and I've never unlearned it. The loudest person on the line is almost never the most dangerous. The trailers with the sponsor decals, the embroidered chairs, the $400 cases, that's the noise people make when they want to be seen. The real thing doesn't need to be seen. The real thing pulls up in a dented car at the far end of the lot, alone in a worn-out jacket, and lets you laugh, and reads the wind while you do. We never saw her again. She never came back to defend the title she wouldn't even take the trophy for. I asked around, later, careful, the way Rennick had been careful. Nothing. No club, no record, no sponsor. Mara Voss the way she'd come out of nowhere and back into it. But every now and then, on a cold morning when the frost looks like spilled sugar and the flags start lying, one of the old hands who was there that day will look out at the 1840 target, or further, all the way out to where they keep the covered one, and go quiet for a second. And the new kids will ask what's wrong. And we tell them. We tell them about the woman they laughed at, the soft bag, the finger in the wind, the Annie Oakley. We tell them about the Cold Bore Mile, and the king who turned his tablet face down, and the 5 longest seconds in the history of the world, and the faint little ring that came back across all that gold evening air. We tell them every bit of it. And then we tell them the one thing she'd want them to know, the thing I think she drove all that way, and put up with all that laughing just to prove to herself one more time. The wind will tell you the truth, but only if you're quiet enough and humble enough and still enough to stop trying to bully it and finally just listen.